Hello everyone, I'm Jim. Welcome back to my channel, What Does God Say? In today's video, we're going to be discussing what is a verse-ologist. Now perhaps you've never heard of that term before, and to be perfectly blunt, I might have made it up. Maybe I coined a phrase or a word and people will start using it, I don't know. I've never heard anybody use this term before. So what is a verse-ologist? Well, let's discuss that. First of all, if you didn't already know, you need to know that the Bible itself, there was from Old Testament, New Testament, there was no chapters and verses in the Bible whatsoever. Not in the epistles from Paul, which are just letters to the churches with warning or teaching. Not in the Gospels, not in the prophets. Nowhere in the Bible when it was written throughout the course of about 1,500 years were there chapters and verses. That was a man-added thing for convenience purpose. Now it does have a great convenience in order to find something more rapidly and to have reference points. But that also has become quite a misused tool. And chapters and verses are not divinely inspired. Let's just get that right out of the way. That was man's way of trying to make things convenient. And it's fine if you use it for convenience. The next thing about that, what is a verse-ologist, is when people or pastors or churches or whomever want to take verses out of the Bible and use them for a purpose that they weren't meant to be used for. So let's talk about that for a few minutes. And we're going to look at probably three verses in the Bible that kind of are somewhat common to Christians, and then we're going to discuss how they're misrepresented, misused, even misunderstood to a degree. So let's just talk about that a little bit more. In real estate, what are the three essential things that you need? You've probably heard this before. It's kind of been a running thing for years, decades even. Location, location, location. Those are the things you need for real estate to make yourself successful. Not that you're actually looking for success in a monetary or house hunting way, but there is a similar motto or saying, slogan if you will, that you might want to consider when reading the Bible. What are the three key elements to reading the Bible? Context, context, context. You must understand the context of what's going on and not just pulling a verse out of the Bible and making it say something it doesn't. Sometimes verses can stand on their own as far as their meaning, a lot of which comes out of Proverbs. A lot of Proverbs can stand on their own. But the point is that you always need to know the context of what's been read. Some of the chapters and verses, or chapters I should say, in the Bible, if you actually read them and then you read, say, the beginning of the verses of the next chapter, they actually separated them in some kind of funny places at times. So there's an acronym that I use called STOP. The S stands for the situation. So what is the situation of the verses and chapter that you're reading? Sounds pretty straightforward, I would think. The T stands for the type of literature being used in that particular passage or situation. Meaning, is it historical? Is it about the laws? Is it a parable that teaches a lesson? Is it a prophecy? Is it a wisdom, namely from the Proverbs? Is it poetry? Is it an epistle? Is it hyperbole? Is it a metaphor? Is it apocalyptic? And so forth. Those things are very key in understanding what you're reading and whether it even pertains to you or not. So what does the O stand for in STOP? It's who or what is the object of the passage. Is it directed to the Jews only? Is it directed to the church? Is it directed to the Pharisees? To all people? To us today? And then the P is whether it is prescriptive or descriptive. In other words, is it something that we as Christians are told to do, which is prescriptive, i.e., God commands us to love. Love one another as Christ loved us. That's a command. Or is it simply descriptive and is just describing something, or perhaps giving background information, some historical value? Let's take the parting of the Red Sea, for example. That certainly doesn't pertain to us today. That was an account out of Exodus about the Israelites being set free from captivity and slavery in Egypt. It shows God's power, His grace, His mercy. Those are attributes of God that always apply to us. But that was a historical account. So that's a descriptive part. At any rate, like I said, we need to read the Bible in context and not just use verses to say whatever we want them to say. And that's becoming more and more of a problem the way I see it. So let's look at a few verses in the Bible and we'll just discuss. I mean, we could do this all day long, right? I could probably do about 50 episodes easily just talking about different verses that are kind of commonplace to us as Christians. Let's just look at a couple. Let's first look at a very common one that I think a lot of Christians know. Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Well, that's all good and well, but do you understand the context of what's going on there and who God's talking to? Jeremiah was giving a word of the Lord to the Israelites who that basically were held captive in Babylon, and was telling them that they needed to submit to their captors and honor God. And so he was kind of appealing or speaking to their kind of grumblings and misgivings about what was going on. And God was relaying through the prophet Jeremiah that they needed to chill out, if you will. He said, well, I've got you. We have to kind of remember that it doesn't always matter what goes on with us here on earth. God's plans are always just plans. Now, does that passage speak to the character of God? Does God know the plans He has for us? Does He care about us? Yes, of course. But you should read that verse in context. If you wanted a similar style verse in the New Testament, let's look at Romans. In Romans 8:28 it says this, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose. Now see there, that's a pretty similar style message, but that's Paul telling us that is God's character for us. So that's a kind of a small verse or variation, way of looking at the versology of it. But let's look at a couple more that get really blown out of context. So let's turn to the book of Malachi a minute and look at a couple of verses. These verses are often used by pastors, preachers, priests, ministers of all kinds in their churches, in their sermons, in their speeches, talking about robbing from God in a message about tithing. Let me first read the verse and then let's just talk about it a minute. You often hear this come up in a sermon about tithing. Malachi 3:8. Will man rob God? Yet you are robbing me. But you say, how have we robbed you? In your tithes and contributions. The problem with that verse is, actually there are several problems pulling that verse out when talking about tithing. This would be I'm only going to talk about what this video is about when it comes to versology. As far as the tithing part goes, I can do a whole nother video on tithing. And let me just say that tithing should be removed from a Christian's vocabulary because it should not be taught from churches. So I just want to be clear, this is not a video on tithing. I'm going to try to stick to the topic of versology and show you what I mean by that. But suffice it to say, Christians are not required to tithe. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't give, they shouldn't donate or contribute. That's not what I'm saying. And just to make that point clear for now, we'll go into it deeper in a tithing video. But for now, let's look at 2 Corinthians. The point is this: whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. So again, we can have a whole different conversation about tithing. In fact, I will at some point in our journey here together. But I just want you to know, I'm not trying to advocate not giving money or helping people. That's not what I'm advocating. I'm just advocating that this verse is taken way out of context and been taught to mean totally different things than what was even being said in Malachi. So let's just back up and understand a couple things about Malachi and what's being said here. Now in Malachi is basically a prophet of God rebuking Israel. Okay, again, we won't go too far down the trail of things, but just to try to put some things in perspective and context. So in chapter 2, verse 1, it says this: "And now, O priest, this command is for you." So Malachi is talking to the priest of the land, the Levitical priest. Okay? So when you look at this verse in Malachi, it is being totally blown out of proportion and context to whom it's being said, what it's being said about, and why it's even being said in the first place. Malachi is during the same time of Nehemiah. So in Nehemiah, we actually can discover that the Levites and the priest, as part of a recommitment for the Temple of Jerusalem, bound themselves in an oath to God for both a blessing and a curse. They would be blessed if they did these things for God. They would be cursed if they did not. So one of the priests was making a mockery of one of the storehouses of God. He wasn't using it for the intended purpose, which is where Malachi comes into play. Malachi is saying you were robbing from God because you were not using his storehouse to feed the people. You were using it for your own glorification and piggy bank, if you will. That's kind of an overstatement. We could dive a lot more to that into the whole tithing video. But I just want you to understand that this verse has nothing to do with Christians tithing. Okay? It doesn't. So the final verse that I want to look at is in Matthew chapter 7. Matthew 7:1 says this: "Judge not, lest you be judged." So everybody seems to use that. Judge not, lest you be judged. But is that all Christ said? No. Let's read the whole thing in context. Let me read chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. "Judge not, lest you be judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use it, it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite! First, take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." He's warning you, though, to judge righteously according to God, not according to you, and to first check yourself for your level of sin or disobedience or irreverence to God before you try to judge somebody else. He's not telling you not to judge. In fact, we have no choice but to judge others by their actions. We make judgments all the time about people, about our safety, about our health. We could go on and on. Christ did not tell you not to judge, period. He said, don't judge without looking at yourself first, examining your own heart first, and then if you're going to judge, or when you judge, you need to judge from God's righteousness, not yours. So I just hope that helps you today. I know that this has raised maybe some more questions, and by all means, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Send me an email if you want to. It's in the description box. And we will try to cover that tithing more in depth, because hopefully I didn't want to confuse you or whatnot, but this wasn't a video meant to be about tithing, but more about what I said, being a versologist. And I would just ask you, please be careful with taking verses out of context. Please be careful when studying the Bible about what you're reading, and making sure you have the context and understanding of what's being said and whom it's being said to and what is being said about. My simple goal in all of this is to help you and to glorify God. And I pray that I did that today. Thank you so much. Take care, and God bless you. Have an amazing day in the Lord.